The unexpected discovery John was a member of the Galactic Enforcement, a force tasked with maintaining order in the vast reaches of space. His job was straightforward: inspect cargo ships, ensure nothing illegal was being smuggled, and keep the peace. Today, however, would change everything. The patrol ship he was assigned to had been called in to check on a routine cargo transport from a well-known freighter, the Sirocco. John had heard of the Sirocco before, a ship with a reputation for shady dealings. It had made countless trips across the galaxy, but no one ever knew exactly what it carried. As John and his team boarded the freighter, the dim lighting and the cold mechanical hum of the ship sent a chill down his spine. The freighter was large, filled with empty, silent hallways. The crew had been dismissed, and the cargo hold was now the only thing left to inspect. John took a deep breath, adjusting his uniform and checking his communicator. The smugglers aboard the Sirocco were known for their sharp tactics. They never let anyone in without a fight, so John was prepared for anything. But nothing prepared him for what he saw next. As they walked into the cargo bay, John noticed a strange, thick smell in the air, almost like a mix of old metal and something living. His eyes scanned the room, expecting to find crates of illegal materials or dangerous tech. Instead, he found rows of cells stacked like sardines in an old storage area. At first, John thought they were just malfunctioning cryogenic pods, but the sight that met his eyes made his stomach turn. Inside the cells were beings alien slaves, their faces pale, eyes wide with fear. They were shackled to the walls, and the air in the room seemed to be filled with their quiet suffering. John froze. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. His mind raced. Slaves in the galaxy? This was a violation of every galactic treaty ever signed. The smugglers were transporting these beings across star systems like they were nothing more than cargo, goods to be traded for profit. John had heard rumors of illegal alien trade, but he'd never imagined it would be something like this. He knew the laws. There was no room for negotiation here. This was wrong on every level. He quickly turned to his team, motioning for them to stand back and remain quiet. His voice dropped to a whisper as he addressed the lead officer, Alex, who stood just behind him. "This is illegal," John muttered, his eyes darting across the room. "We need to report this immediately." Alex, looking over at the prisoners, nodded. "But what about the smugglers? If they know we found this, we deal with them," John said firmly. "But these people, these aliens, they can't stay here. We need to get them out of here." His heart pounded in his chest, a fire of anger growing within him. He wasn't sure where that fire came from. He had always been a lawman, someone who followed orders. But the sight of these aliens, shackled and starved, it didn't just strike him as wrong. It felt like a betrayal of everything that made him human. Alex hesitated. "You know what that means, right? We're talking about a full-on breach of protocol. If the smugglers find out we're not just confiscating their illegal tech, they'll fight back." John clenched his fists. He knew. He had seen enough of these smugglers to know that they were violent and would stop at nothing to protect their illegal business. But how could he turn a blind eye? How could he walk away from this? One of the aliens, a tall, slender creature with deep purple skin, met his eyes. There was no mistaking the fear in the alien's gaze. It was a kind of terror John had seen before, but never in such a vulnerable form. It was the look of someone who knew there was no escape, no hope. And that, more than anything, broke John's heart. He couldn't leave them behind. But there was a problem. They were outnumbered, and he had no backup. The smugglers wouldn't just sit idly by while John tried to free their slaves. They'd come for him. They'd come for all of them. And yet, even knowing the danger, John couldn't bring himself to turn away. The thoughts racing through his mind were interrupted by a loud clattering sound from behind him. He spun around, hand on his weapon, but it was just a young alien, no older than a teenager, Trying to make its way to the front of the cell, John knelt down, his voice soft and reassuring as he spoke to the creature. "Hey, it's going to be okay. We're going to get you out of here." The alien's eyes widened in confusion. It wasn't sure if it could trust him, but it seemed to sense something in John's tone, something sincere. The young alien hesitated before slowly inching forward, dragging its shackled limbs with it. John reached out, carefully unchaining it. The alien flinched at first, but then it relaxed. "Thank you," the alien whispered in a language John didn't understand. John's heart skipped a beat. There was no going back now. He had just set them free, and there was no way he was going to turn them over to the smugglers. As he helped the others one by one, a heavy sense of responsibility weighed on him. He wasn't just freeing prisoners. He was making a decision that could change his life forever. The smugglers had no idea what was coming, but John knew that by the end of this day, nothing would be the same. But with every alien he freed, John felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't sure how he was going to get them all to safety, but he knew he had to try. They deserved a chance at freedom, and if it meant putting his own life at risk, so be it. The smugglers wouldn't be pleased, but John would not leave them to suffer. He was going to fight for them. He had to. The decision to act. John stood in the dimly lit cargo hold, the sounds of his breathing the only thing that seemed to fill the space. Around him, the aliens once prisoners were slowly coming to their senses. Their eyes were wide, filled with a mix of hope and fear, unsure of what to do next. John knew they had no reason to trust him. After all, they had been betrayed by countless others before, sold into slavery by those who saw them as nothing more than tools for profit. His hand was still gripping the alien's shackles, and his fingers trembled slightly. There was no turning back now. The smugglers were going to realize something was wrong soon, and when they did, it would be a fight for survival. He could already hear the echo of their footsteps moving quickly through the corridors of the ship. They wouldn't just let him free the slaves and walk away, they would retaliate. John didn't doubt that for a second. "John, we can't just keep doing this." Alex, the lead officer, whispered behind him. The voice was low, filled with doubt. John turned to face him, but there was no turning back now. "I know what we're up against, Alex," John said, his voice low but firm. "But these beings, these aliens, have been living a nightmare. We can't leave them here. They deserve better than this." Alex ran his hand over his face, frustration evident in his eyes. "You're right, but think about the bigger picture. We're talking about smugglers who have powerful connections. They'll hunt us down. The entire galactic system will be after us. We can't fight them all, John. This could ruin everything we've worked for." John's gaze hardened, his mind made up. He knew the risks. He knew the consequences. But he also knew that he couldn't live with himself if he just turned his back on these people now. The image of the young alien's fearful eyes haunted him, and he couldn't ignore it. "We'll deal with it as it comes," John said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But right now we have a job to do." Alex nodded, reluctantly agreeing. "All right, but you need to be careful. You're the one they'll be after." John turned back to the aliens, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure how he would get them to safety, but he knew he couldn't just leave them to the smugglers. Mercy. They had no idea what lay ahead, but they were free, and that was a start. As John unshackled another alien, a sharp sound echoed through the corridors, signaling that the smugglers had discovered the missing slaves. He didn't have much time. John motioned to the aliens to stay low, instructing them to move quietly towards the rear of the ship. His mind raced, calculating the best escape route, but everything seemed complicated. The ship was large, and the smugglers would have it surrounded within minutes. They needed to move fast. "What do we do now?" one of the aliens whispered, its voice shaky. It was a female alien, her skin a pale green and her eyes filled with uncertainty. She had been the first to step forward when John freed the shackles. She seemed to be the leader of the group. "We're going to get you out of here," John said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "But you need to trust me. Stay close. And keep quiet. Can you do that?" The alien nodded, though it was clear she was just as scared as John felt. The other aliens followed her lead, moving silently through the dimly lit corridors. John kept a hand on his blaster, ready for anything. He couldn't shake the feeling that the smugglers were already closing in on them. He knew they were running out of time. The smugglers had to be getting closer. John could feel the tension building, every step they took bringing them closer to danger. But even with the fear gnawing at him, he knew he had no other choice. The smugglers would come after them, but if they kept moving, they had a chance. As they neared the rear of the ship, John's heart began to race. He could hear the footsteps of the smugglers echoing louder now. They weren't far behind. He quickly turned to the alien group, trying to keep them calm. "Listen," John whispered, his voice urgent. "We're almost there. Once we reach the escape pods, you'll be safe. Just stay quiet and keep moving. Do you understand?" The alien leader gave a slight nod, her eyes glimmering with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She understood. They all understood what was at stake. But just as they reached the final hallway before the escape pods, the ship's loudspeakers crackled. To life, a harsh voice echoed throughout the corridors, and John's blood ran cold. "Intruders in the cargo hold. All personnel report immediately to the lower deck. Do not let them escape. They are to be eliminated." The voice belonged to one of the smugglers. They were onto him now. John's stomach twisted. He turned to the aliens, urgency clear in his eyes. "Move. Now," he ordered, grabbing the nearest alien by the arm and pulling them toward the escape pods. The smugglers were coming. There was no time to waste. As John rushed the group toward the nearest pod, the sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing down the hallway. The smugglers were closing in faster than he expected. His pulse quickened. His mind raced. How had they gotten here so quickly? "John, they're going to catch us," Alex shouted, panic in his voice. "We're too late. They're everywhere." John didn't have time to respond. They were almost at the escape pods, but they weren't safe yet. The smugglers were getting closer, their voices growing louder. John's heart was in his throat. He looked back at the aliens, each of them terrified, but determined. The moment they entered the pod, they would be free. But he had to get them there first. A sudden burst of gunfire echoed from behind them. John dove forward, pushing the aliens into the pod, and then quickly followed. As the hatch slammed shut, he breathed a sigh of relief. They were in. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The smugglers would chase them, and John knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger struggle. He looked around at the aliens, their faces full of fear and hope. This wasn't the end, but it was a new beginning for them all. And for John, it was a decision he could never take back. The escape pod shuddered as it tore away. From the Sirocco, the smuggler's ship now behind them, John's heart was still pounding in his chest, his hands gripping the controls as he set the pod on a course toward the nearest planet. The smugglers would be coming for them. They always did. No one escaped them without consequences. But for now, the crew of the escape pod, John and the aliens, were free. The air inside the pod was thick with tension. The aliens, still shaken by their previous ordeal, sat in silence, their eyes wide and unsure. John could see the fear in their faces, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. They were free, yes, but they had no home, no future, no purpose. They had been slaves for so long, their lives dictated by the whims of others. For the first time, they had the chance to make their own choices, but the uncertainty was almost as terrifying as their past. John glanced at the alien leader, the one he had unshackled first. She was sitting in the corner, her eyes scanning the pod, her fingers trembling slightly. Her name was Lyra, and though she hadn't spoken much, John could sense a deep inner strength in her. She was trying to hold it together for the others, but he could see the cracks in her facade. John cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "We're going to need a plan," he said, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "The smugglers will be after us. They'll track this pod. We don't have much time." Lyra's eyes met his, and she nodded slowly. "We've been running for so long," she said, her voice rough from disuse. "I don't know what to do next." John understood the sentiment. The galaxy was vast, and the smugglers had connections everywhere. Hiding wouldn't be easy. He had to think quickly. They needed a place to lay low, somewhere safe. But finding that place wouldn't be easy either. "We need to get to the nearest planet," John said. "We can find shelter, regroup, and figure out what to do next. But where?" Lyra asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "The smugglers have resources. They can find us wherever we go." John bit his lip, his eyes scanning the display. He didn't have the answer yet, but he wasn't going to let the smugglers win. Not after everything they had been through. "There's a colony on the outskirts of this sector," he said, his fingers tapping against the controls. "It's not much, but it's remote. The smugglers probably won't think to look there." Lyra looked uncertain. "And what happens when we get there?" "What if the smugglers follow us?" "We lay low," John replied. "We keep our heads down, try to blend in, and we wait for the right moment to strike." The word strike hung in the air. It wasn't just about survival anymore. John was starting to feel something else, something stronger. These aliens, these beings who had been oppressed for so long, were now in his care. They were his responsibility, and he wasn't about to let anyone harm them. Lyra nodded again, though her face was still clouded with worry. "You really think we can make it?" "I know we can," John said, determination in his voice. "We're in this together now." The pod sped through space, the stars outside a blur as they made their way toward the colony. John kept his focus on the VAI controls, his mind racing. He had been a soldier for years, trained to handle dangerous situations, but this was different. These weren't just enemies he was facing. These were lives he was protecting. And for the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of that responsibility. He glanced at Lyra again, noticing how she was trying to comfort the others. She was a leader by nature, even if she didn't realize it. John could see the strength in her, the way she moved and spoke. She wasn't just a slave. She was a survivor. And with her leading them, they might have a chance. But even with Lyra's strength, John knew that the road ahead would be treacherous. The smugglers wouldn't give up easily. They would come after them with everything they had. And if they were caught, there would be no mercy. John couldn't let that happen. The days on the run felt long, the constant fear of being found never far from his mind. The smugglers were relentless, and their reach extended across the galaxy. But John refused to let fear control him. He had made a promise to the aliens, and he would keep it. No matter what. As they neared the colony, John began to prepare himself for what was to come. The planet was remote, but it wasn't completely isolated. There were people there, people who might help, but also people who might turn them in for the right price. John had to be cautious. He couldn't trust anyone, not yet. Lyra seemed to sense the tension in the air. She moved to sit beside him, her voice low. "You're worried." John looked at her, surprised. "What makes you say that?" "You've been quiet," she said. "You're planning something." John hesitated. He hadn't shared his plan yet, but he knew they needed a way to survive. "We can't stay on this planet forever," he said. "The smugglers will track us. But if we can get to a more secure location, maybe one of the old military bases, they'll never find us." Lyra's eyes darkened, and she nodded. "We'll do whatever it takes. We're with you." John felt a weight lift off his chest. They were in this together. And even though the future was uncertain, he knew he wasn't alone. The colony came into view, a small speck in the vastness of space. It was a place that would give them a chance to rest, regroup, and prepare for what was to come. But it was also a place full of dangers. The smugglers could be anywhere, and John had to be ready for anything. As the pod descended toward the surface, John's mind raced. The smugglers wouldn't give up, but neither would he. And as the pod touched down, he made a silent vow to himself. He wouldn't let these aliens fall back into the hands of their captors. He would fight for their freedom, no matter what it took. They had made it this far. And now they would fight to survive. The smuggler's wrath, the pod landed with a soft thud on the outskirts of the colony, the vibrations humming through the hull. John quickly powered down the engines and looked out the window. The planet was barren, with little vegetation, a dry and dusty world. The colony was small, its buildings old and weathered, but it was a place that could offer them a brief reprieve. A chance to hide, to plan their next move. John turned to the group of aliens sitting in silence behind him. They were all still shaken, eyes wide and uncertain. Some of them had begun to speak among themselves, but their voices were hushed, as though afraid of drawing attention to themselves. They were free from the smugglers, yes, but they knew their freedom was fragile. It could be ripped away at any moment. "We need to move fast," John said, turning to face Lyra, who was sitting near the back of the pod. "Stay close to me. Do not attract attention." Lyra nodded, her eyes hard, filled with the same determination John had seen in her since they first met. She understood the danger. They were no longer just fugitives, they were marked. John opened the hatch, stepping out into the dry, dusty air. The colony was eerily quiet. The buildings stood in the distance, casting long shadows as the sun began to dip below the horizon. It was the perfect time to blend in, dark enough to hide, but not so dark that they couldn't see if anyone was approaching. "We have to keep a low profile," John repeated as he motioned for the others to follow. "Head towards the settlement and try to find some shelter. We'll figure out the next step once we're safe." The aliens hesitated for a moment, then began to move, cautiously. They didn't know what to expect. They had been slaves for so long, and now they were free. But their world had changed overnight. No longer were they shackled and beaten, but now they were hunted, outlaws in a galaxy that didn't care about their pain. John led the group through the colony's outskirts, weaving through narrow alleys and hidden pathways. He knew this planet had a reputation for being lawless, but that didn't mean it was completely safe. There were traders here, and mercenaries, and sometimes even smugglers. Anyone with the right amount of credits could be bought. As they moved deeper into the colony, John kept a close eye on the surroundings. His senses were sharp, his mind alert. The smugglers were relentless, and if they had managed to trace the escape pod's location, they wouldn't hesitate to send a group of bounty hunters to track them down. But just as John thought they were in the clear, a loud explosion shook the ground beneath them. The sky lit up with flashes of bright orange and yellow as a nearby building erupted in flames. The sound of screams echoed through the streets. Panic spread like wildfire. John's instincts kicked in. He turned to Lyra, his face set with determination. "Get down! Move!" he shouted, pushing them into an alleyway. The aliens followed, but they were visibly frightened. They had never experienced anything like this. The world they had known was one of darkness and oppression, and now they were thrown into a chaos they couldn't understand. "What was that?" one of the aliens asked, his voice shaking. "Stay quiet," John ordered, his eyes scanning the chaos unfolding around them. He had to keep them safe. The smugglers were here. He could feel it. He pulled the group further into the shadows, ducking behind a crumbling wall. The streets were full of smoke and dust, and he could hear the heavy boots of soldiers moving quickly through the streets, shouting orders. "They're here," John muttered to himself. The smugglers weren't just going to give up. They had a strong network, and they had likely tracked the pod's signature. But the timing couldn't have been worse. The colony was now in the middle of an attack, and it seemed like the smugglers were determined to tear it apart to find them. John's pulse raced. There was no time to waste. They had to move, and they had to move fast. "Lyra, take the group and head for the old warehouse district," John said, his voice low but firm. "Stay hidden until I get back." Lyra opened her mouth to argue, but John cut her off. "There's no time for debate. You need to keep them safe. I'll find a way to get us out of this." Lyra hesitated, her face tight with worry, but she nodded. "We'll wait for you," she said quietly. "Be careful." John watched them disappear into the shadows, the weight of the responsibility heavy on his shoulders. His plan was simple. He had to find the smugglers before they found him. He needed information, and he knew where to get it. The smugglers had a contact here, someone who had been helping them smuggle goods in and out of the colony. John had met this contact once, a gruff man named Rax who ran a small tavern on the far edge of town. If anyone knew where the smugglers were hiding, it would be him. John made his way through the streets, careful to avoid the soldiers and the chaos. The fire still raged in the background, smoke filling the air as buildings crumbled. The colony was in complete turmoil. He couldn't afford to waste time, but at the same time, he couldn't let himself get caught in the crossfire. He found Rax's tavern at the end of a narrow street, the sign above the door flickering weakly in the smoke-filled air. John pushed the door open cautiously, the sound of the hinges loud in the quiet. Inside, the tavern was dimly lit, with a few patrons nursing drinks at the bar. Rax was standing behind the counter, wiping a glass with a rag. He looked up as John entered, his eyes narrowing when he saw the human. "What do you want?" Rax asked, his voice low, full of suspicion. "I need information," John said, his tone steady but urgent. "The smugglers. I know you're working with them. I need to know where they're hiding." Rax's eyes flickered with surprise, but he didn't flinch. "You think I'm going to give you that kind of information?" "I don't have time to argue," John said, stepping closer to the counter. "People's lives are on the line. I'm not leaving until you tell me what I need to know." Rax studied him for a long moment before sighing. "You're crazy if you think you can take them on. They'll kill you, you know that, right?" John met his gaze, unflinching. "I don't have a choice." Rax grumbled under his breath, then leaned in closer. "Fine, they're holed up in the old refinery, just past the edge of town. But don't say I didn't warn you. You're gonna get yourself killed, human." John's heart skipped a beat. The old refinery was just outside the colony limits, a place few people dared to go. But it was the only lead he had. He had to move fast. He turned and headed for the door, but not before Rax's voice stopped him. "If you're serious about this," Rax called after him, "you'd better be ready for a fight." John didn't turn back. He didn't need to. He was ready. The smugglers wouldn't escape this time. The price of freedom. The air was thick with dust as John approached the old refinery, the towering structure looming in the distance. The sky above was dark, the sun long since set, leaving only the faint glow of distant fires and the harsh, flickering lights from the refinery's old machinery. This was the heart of the smugglers' operation, and John was about to walk straight into it. There was no turning back now. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. John moved swiftly, keeping to the shadows as he neared the entrance. His hand was steady on his blaster, his senses alert. The refinery was abandoned, or so it seemed. The old machines were rusty, and the place had the feel of a forgotten relic. But John knew better. The smugglers had set up camp here, and he couldn't afford to underestimate them. They would be waiting, watching, and he had to be ready. As John neared the main entrance, he paused, scanning the area for any signs of movement. The sound of his footsteps was the only thing breaking the eerie silence. He had learned to move quietly over the years, but he couldn't be sure that he hadn't been spotted. He had no backup, no reinforcements, and no allies here. It was just him against a group of ruthless smugglers. The first few steps inside the refinery were tense. The air was thick with the smell of oil and rust, and the faint hum of old machinery sent shivers down his spine. The place felt abandoned, but John knew better than to trust appearances. The smugglers had eyes everywhere, and they knew the value of silence. John's eyes adjusted to the dim light as he moved deeper into the refinery, his footsteps careful but quick. The smugglers had to be close. He could feel it. Every part of him was alert, every nerve on edge. His thoughts were sharp, focusing only on the task at hand. He had come here to end this. For good. As John rounded a corner, he saw movement ahead, figures, dressed in dark clothing, moving between the shadows. They were smugglers, all right. John's heart rate quickened, but he didn't falter. He had a mission to complete, and he wouldn't let these criminals get away. The first smuggler didn't see him coming. John acted quickly, his blaster firing. A single shot that sent the man sprawling to the ground. It was fast, clean, and efficient. No hesitation, but the sound of the shot echoed through the refinery like a gunshot in the night. And John knew he had just made himself known. The smugglers would be on him in seconds. He had to move fast. He ducked into an alcove, his heart pounding as the sound of footsteps grew louder. He didn't have much time. The refinery was about to become a war zone. John's mind raced as he planned his next move. He couldn't take them all head-on. The smugglers were well armed, and there were too many of them. But he had something they didn't: knowledge of the refinery's layout. He had studied the schematics before, and he knew there was a control room at the center of the facility. If he could get to it, he could shut down the refinery's power, throw the smugglers into darkness, and buy himself enough time to get out or to take them down. With a quick glance to ensure no one was following him, John moved toward the control room, his footsteps light but hurried. His hand was ready on his blaster, and his eyes scanned the shadows ahead. He could hear the smugglers yelling, shouting orders, trying to organize themselves. They were panicking. They hadn't expected this much resistance, and it was starting to show. John reached the control room door, pausing for a moment to catch his breath. He could feel the weight of the decision hanging on him. The smugglers had done terrible things. They had enslaved innocent beings, trafficked them across the galaxy like goods to be sold. They had taken everything from the aliens, and now they had to pay the price. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice. With a swift movement, John activated the control panel, and the refinery's lights flickered before going out entirely. Darkness enveloped the facility, and the smugglers' voices turned to shouts of confusion. John grinned to himself. It was the moment he had been waiting for. He moved quickly, making his way through the darkened refinery, using his knowledge of the layout to his advantage. The smugglers were disoriented, their flashlights cutting through the darkness in wild arcs. John used the chaos to his advantage, slipping through the shadows, striking when he had the opportunity. His movements were precise, his training kicking in as he neutralized one smuggler after another. But just as he thought he had the upper hand, a voice broke through the silence. "Stop right there." John froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He slowly turned to face the source of the voice, his hand still on his blaster. Out of the shadows stepped the leader of the smugglers, a tall, imposing figure, dressed in black armor. His face was obscured by a helmet, but his presence was menacing enough. "So you're the one who's been causing all this trouble," the smuggler leader said, his voice cold and filled with disdain. John didn't respond, his eyes narrowing as he sized up the leader. He could feel the tension building. This was the moment. The smuggler's leader had to be taken down if he was going to end this once and for all. The smuggler leader grinned beneath his helmet. "You think you've won? You think these aliens will be free? You're nothing but a pawn in a much larger game. John's grip tightened on his blaster. This ends tonight. The leader lunged forward, a blaster firing from his wrist. John ducked, narrowly avoiding the shot, and fired back. The leader blocked the shot with ease, his armor absorbing the impact. You think you can stop me? The leader taunted, taking a step closer. I control this operation. You're nothing. John's pulse was racing, but he knew he couldn't afford to hesitate. The smuggler leader was powerful, but he wasn't invincible. John had come this far, and he wasn't about to back down now. With a burst of speed, John closed the distance between them, knocking the leader's blaster aside and delivering a swift punch to his stomach. The leader staggered back, and John didn't give him a chance to recover. He fired his blaster point blank, and the leader fell to the ground, his body crumpling as the life drained from him. It was over. The smugglers were defeated. John took a deep breath, his heart still pounding. He looked around at the refinery, now silent except for the sound of his own breathing. The battle had been fierce, but it was done. The smugglers had been brought to justice, and the aliens were free. For now, at least. John turned toward the exit, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and there would always be more threats. But for the first time, John felt a sense of peace. He had made a difference. He had fought for what was right, and in the end, it had been worth it. He made his way back to the colony, where Lyra and the others were waiting. They had survived. They had won. The journey was far from over, but they had taken the first step toward a new future.